Okay, here we are again, and we're still in our series on the minor prophets, and today we're going to be going through the first two chapters of the prophet Habakkuk. And the title that I chose for today is "The Righteous Will Live by Their Faithfulness." And I think you'll have that figured out by the time we get to the end of our presentation today. But I want to begin with this question, and that is, how do you deal with big questions about things you don't understand? And what are some of these questions? So take a few minutes, think about that, and we will be right back. Okay, let's set up a little bit of the context for this prophet, Habakkuk. Habakkuk is a pre-exilic prophet, meaning that he was prophesying to Judah before they went into exile to the Babylonians, and that is kind of the reoccurring theme that happens throughout this little book. So the message of his book was during the reign of King Jehoiakim, which would be 609 to 598 BC. And if you remember, Judah would be taken into captivity by the Babylonians around 586/87. Which brings us to the King Zedekiah at the time of that captivity, when Judah would be taken captive. So before all of that is happening, in these decades leading up to the exile, Jehoiakim was a vassal of Egypt. So what's happening is there's a power struggle happening between Babylon to the east of Judah and Egypt, which is kind of to the southwest of Judah, and so Judah's kind of stuck in the middle of these two very powerful groups, these powerful nations, and so their allegiances would kind of flip back and forth. So the time of Jehoiakim, Judah was beholden to Egypt, and so Jehoiakim was a vassal, which means he was answering to Egypt, and Judah at the time would siding in with Egypt in this emerging struggle for power between Egypt and Babylon. And then eventually Judah's allegiance would shift to Babylon under Zedekiah, but Babylon would end up destroying Judah and taking them into captivity. So Habakkuk appears during the time leading up to the exile. And the first two chapters of the book are a dialogue between Habakkuk and God. And then the third chapter is a poetic prayer calling on God to act according to his power, and concluding with hope rooted in faith. Habakkuk is unique in a way in that he does not prophesy to the people or rebuke the people. Rather, his words are directed to God, and God answers him. And so this is usually seen in the form of Habakkuk's complaints. He has two complaints, and then God answers both of those complaints. And so we're going to look at those today. So let's start reading at chapter 1, verse 1, and through verse 4, and this is Habakkuk's first complaint. The prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. So in these verses, Habakkuk seems to be exasperated and becoming impatient with God, wondering if God is even listening in verse 2. And he is complaining about the violence and the injustice and the conflict that are among the people of Judah. And he describes that. in verse 3, and then in verse 4, the word of God seems to be being ignored. The law is paralyzed. And also in verse 4 that the leaders are corrupt. When it talks about the wicked hemming the righteous, it's about corrupt leadership in Judah. And so Habakkuk has all these complaints and he says, God, how long are you going to put up with this? And so as he's crying out to God and he says, how long, how long? Well, then God answers. And we have in verse 5, God's reply to Habakkuk. And God says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock rulers and scoff, or mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people whose strength is their God. So God answers Habakkuk. And his answer is that God is going to judge Judah by raising up the Babylonians. And here we have an example of God's sovereignty really over geopolitical events. So God is going to raise up the Babylonians, who are a wicked people, to bring judgment on Judah. And God describes the Babylonians. They are ruthless, impetuous, feared. They do what they want. They are skilled in violence. They mock kings and mock rulers. And then this kind of key statement, their own strength is their God. We're going to come back to that near the end of today. So this is God's solution to Judah. I'm going to raise up a people to conquer them. And these are going to be nasty people. It's a nasty nation. So I want to go from here to a table talk. And the question is, does God's solutions to your questions always make sense? Can you think of examples, either when they do make sense or when they don't make sense? But do they always make sense? So take a minute, think about that, and then we'll come back to Habakkuk's second complaint. Okay, here we are in verse 12 of the first chapter. Habakkuk's second complaint to the Lord. He reads like this: Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them referring to Babylon, to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net, he gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and he is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? I will stand my watch. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. So basically, Habakkuk is taken off guard by God's response. Considering who God is, or he's saying, considering who you are, everlasting and holy, and this is the solution you come up with, you are going to judge Judah's wickedness with a nation that is even more wicked. And in Habakkuk's mind, maybe this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It talks about how the wicked Babylonians rejoice in their wickedness after this kind of analogy he uses of the sea creatures and how they're abused by the wicked foe, and how they sacrifice to their nets and they burn incense. They make an idol of their ways, of their strength, and because it offers them luxury and it offers them the choicest food. And so the Babylonians rejoice in their own wickedness, and they deify their wickedness. And is there an end to their destruction? And then Habakkuk then lets the Lord know that he will be waiting for an explanation in chapter 2, verse 1. And then again, the Lord replies to Habakkuk. Verse 2, then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end, and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up, his desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him, he is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations, and takes captive all the peoples. Here we have the first part of God's response to Habakkuk. And what God says to him is he instructs Habakkuk to write it down on tablets to be distributed. So he wants this part to be distributed amongst the people. But what he says is that God's revelation has an appointed time, and it will happen. And so what Habakkuk is seeing here is the rising up of Babylon, an evil nation that is going to come and judge Judah. God's going to use them to judge Judah. And in his mind, this is not making a whole lot of sense. But then God says, there's an appointed time for everything, and it will happen. And what God is doing is beginning to reveal to Habakkuk his sovereign will. And his instruction is to Habakkuk is to be patient, because judgment will come at the right time. And then God goes ahead and contrasts the enemy with the righteous person. The enemy is proud. Their judgment is skewed by wine. They're arrogant, they're greedy, never satisfied, even if they capture all of the nations. But the righteous, God says, will live according to their faithfulness. Their faithfulness to God. We'll come back to that. And Habakkuk goes on to describe then the judgment that awaits Babylon, but declaring 5 woes. So God is communicating through Habakkuk 5 woes that are really in store for Babylon. So Babylon is going to be used temporarily to judge Judah. Jeremiah prophesied it would be 70 years. And so we covered that last week a bit in the prophecy of Haggai. However, Babylon is not off the hook. God uses Babylon, but he does not endorse Babylon. And he actually has judgment in store. And so we look at these 5 woes. And so let's read about them first, and then we'll summarize. Starting in verse 6 again. Will not all of them being the nations that have been abused, taunt him, Babylon, with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion. How long must this go on? Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will not they wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood. You have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many people, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire? That the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink, and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So we have these woes. The first two woes have to do with unjust economic practices, building wealth through extortion, using wealth to build your own life, the extorted wealth to build your own life. And what God is saying is this will eventually backfire, and they will become victims of their own practices, because evil begets evil. The third woe has to do with injustice and slave labor. See, slave labor only motivates the slaves to revolt. And this evil scheme, the Lord says, will be replaced by the glory of the Lord, even as the waters cover the sea. So that in place of injustice and in place of slavery and this abuse of people, there will be a time when that is replaced by the glory of the Lord. The fourth woe has to do with drunkenness, immorality, and violence. The Lord will judge. Verse 16 says, the Lord's right hand, that's God's judgment. The Lord will judge and bring disgrace on the oppressor, even as if they have disgraced others. See, evil begets evil. The fifth woe addresses idolatry. We read a verse back in chapter 1, in verse 11, that says, guilty people whose own strength is their God. And now here they're building wooden things and stone things that really reflect just what they love about themselves, what they worship about themselves. And that's what idolatry, when you kind of scratch beneath the surface of idolatry, what you find is humans worshiping themselves. In their idolatry, they are worshiping themselves. Their own strength is their God. And of course, God makes this point, like, how do you expect lifeless things made out of wood and stone to give you any comfort or any guidance? It's not going to happen. And then he goes from idolatry and accusing the Babylonians of idolatry, and he makes this statement in verse 20, that the Lord is in the temple. Well, we know that the temple is about the presence of the living God. Not a stone idol, not a wooden idol. The Lord is in the temple. There is only one living, true God. And then he says, let all the earth be silent before him. Let all the earth be silent. There'll come a time when all the nations and all the kings will stop, and the only one to be heard from is God himself. And that's how this whole thing will kind of come to a conclusion. And this message is not just about judgment on only Babylon, but all future Babylons, all future kingdoms, all future empires after Babylon, they all come to the same end. Evil begets evil. The evil that they have done on others will then be returned to them, because evil begets evil. And so when all this is going on, and Habakkuk sees this happening right before his very eyes, what is Habakkuk's job? What is the position he is to take? So Habakkuk's job and our job is to be faithful in righteousness until God fulfills all that he has promised. Whatever the circumstances, we know that God is just and will make things right at the right time. So no matter what you see going on, the righteous will live by their faithfulness. We remain faithful to God. We lean on him because we know, and we have this underlying faith, knowing that in his time, all things will be made right. So let's conclude today with this question. How are righteousness, faithfulness, and patience connected? And how do these help us in the circumstances of our lives? And then take time to pray.